to all of you online, and now I know that we're going to also record this, so anyone that wasn't able to join can also have a look at this presentation afterwards. I find recording these is so useful because sometimes you have the most important ones I want to see when I'm traveling or something else, and it's really nice while I'm doing the laundry or whatever else to have the opportunity to take the time to listen and to see the presentations. So this, the idea for this brown bag started several months ago, probably 6 months, when Valid came to visit. And in that meeting, we talked about some of the things that they were working on that I thought would be really interesting to a much broader group. And I said, I'm not the one who really, A, understands the impressiveness of some of the technical work you're doing, but B, I'm not the one who is going to put the application to work most effectively around the world. So you need to talk to our broader audience, and if you could find the opportunity to come back and do a brown bag, I promised to pull together a good group, so I've delivered. And also, a lot of our nutritionists and a lot of our players in the field could also participate. So here we are, and my job is simply to say good morning, and we'll have a nice meeting afterwards on some of the details. So very much welcome to all of you, and thank you for participating.
Great, thank you, Lauren, and thank you very much for everyone for coming and those online for taking time to listen to us. So, my name's Steve Collins. I'm one of the founders and the director of Valid International. I thought I'd just give you a quick overview on Valid International and where we've come from, what we've done, and what we're focusing on now. If I have next slide, please. Great. So, essentially, Valid has always aimed to generate evidence to improve practice and impact of humanitarian development interventions and their accountability. We've done this very much from a field perspective. So we've always been field practitioners that are addressing practical problems that have confronted us in our day-to-day practice. And we've brought together sort of multi-sectoral, you know, I'm a medical doctor, we've got Ernest, a medical doctor, we've got a lot of nutritionists, statisticians, and then often anthropologists and social sector people. The aim has been to take operational evidence and develop it in a rigorous fashion and get peer-reviewed sort of publications where we found what didn't work. And then we have a range of partners, whether they be sort of University College London or Tufts or different academic institutions that we work with to add breadth and academic rigor. So I think now let's talk a little bit about what we've achieved. And I wanted to focus on two things. You obviously all heard of CMAM. Well, that started originally as CTC, Community-Based Therapeutic Care. And that arose because we were working as doctors and nutritionists setting up therapeutic feeding centres. And we realised that these therapeutic centres weren't getting coverage and they had high risk. And so we developed the original community-based model to address those issues. And particularly, we wanted to look at coverage. And so the CTC model itself really took what was a supply-driven clinical model of care for therapeutic feeding centres, where you got children and put them into treatment in centres, and you supplied a cure to them. And it took that to a demand-based public health model where we work with communities to create knowledge and demand for good nutrition and allow them to access treatment. And so to do that, we had to start looking at public health indicators, particularly coverage. And so that then, once we collected a database of 25,000 cases to get CTC at that stage, then when the UN took it on, it changed its name to CMAM. To get it accepted, we did programs in Malawi, Sudan, Niger, Ethiopia. And we started to realize we needed these indicators for coverage. And so that's where the whole work that Ernest will talk about came from, that at that point there were no direct ways to measure coverage. So we started developing these direct methods to measure coverage in practical situations, and the first one was one called CSAS, but that quickly evolved into these tools, Squeak, which now has become a global standard for investigation into coverage and access, and then Sleek, which is a semi-quantitative quality assurance type technique. And now we've moved on to these rapid assessment method, this RAM method, and also what we call S3M, which is wide area spatial surveys. And what they have done, they've allowed us to decrease sample sizes using these new classical statistical techniques that weren't really in mainstream. So we can decrease sample sizes, therefore decrease cost. But at the same time, they allow us to actually get more data from these smaller samples that allows us particularly to disaggregate the data spatially. So not only can we give you a headline prevalence, but we can say, actually, in this particular area, there's a higher prevalence, or this particular area, there's a lower prevalence. And at the same time, we wanted to look at the factors influencing that. And so the new tools allow us to look at barriers and boosters. So we can not only say where either coverage is high or prevalence is low or whatever, but we can start to tell you why that is. And Ernest is going to talk a lot more about that, so I won't go into any more. But essentially, that's how it evolved. And our current focus at the moment, next slide, is to roll out and to increase the rigor of these techniques. So we've developed within Valid International a unit called Valid Measures that Ernest leads to focus on this. So this is one of our key areas of focus for Valid International. At the same time, as CMAM rolled out, the cost of the products was very high. And also they were exclusively initially made in developed countries and imported into developing countries. Now, that wasn't our model. We wanted to ensure that these products could be made locally out of locally grown ingredients by local actors and then used through local networks. So we started a separate charity, Valid Nutrition, to focus on product research and development. And that's particularly been to lower the cost and to increase the use of local ingredients. And we published a paper in the American Journal a few months ago showing that we now have a ready-to-use therapeutic food with no milk powder and with no peanuts, so made out of soya, maize, sorghum, and all of which can be grown locally, that is substantially lower cost and is as efficacious as the standard plum peanut ready-to-use therapeutic food peanut milk recipe. But because there's no peanuts, it's not so prone to fungal contamination, and no milk, it's way lower cost and can be made locally. So that's been a major focus. In addition, we've been researching the causes and how to look at the cause of malnutrition, particularly how you harness the mass of secondary data that's out there. And so we've been looking through Valid Measures Unit at data fusion techniques where we look at prevalence and we look at population figures and we fuse them to actually look at burden. Because obviously, previously people were just looking at prevalence, but if it's a very low population area, prevalence might not be where you wanted to focus because there's no people there. But once you fuse the two and you can get a burden, actually it's really useful practical information of where to focus interventions. And so that's just an example. We've been doing that with a lot of secondary data. And then our final area, we're looking at essentially CMAM was an innovation, a route to the consumer innovation. It changed the supply-driven clinical model into a demand-driven public health model. We're now looking at expanding that for the prevention and treatment of malnutrition. Particularly, we're interested in public-private partnerships of how we can harness our techniques to look at demand and look at barriers and boosters demand, to look at retail sales of preventative products. And so that's an area we're doing at the moment. Actually, just one other area in the product area as well. We did a large paper on probiotics. We think there's a huge, because of the interplay with infection and malnutrition and nutrition, playing out largely in the gut and a lot of it mediated through the microbiome, we think there's a huge potential for the creation of active nutritional compounds that are probiotically enhanced. And we published a large study in Malawi in the Lancet in 2009 showing that we could reduce mortality in the recovery phase of the treatment of SAM with a probiotic-enhanced product. At the time, the probiotics were very expensive and they were difficult to use. Now they're much cheaper and easy to use. So that's another area of focus. So I think that's all from me. I just wanted to give you an overall view of what VALID are doing. Now we're going to focus particularly on the measures, the VALID measures unit and our new surveying and mapping technique. So over to Ernest.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you for this opportunity. So we'll get into the unit. We call it VALID measures. And we put this slide sort of to guide us what I'm going to talk about. We call the measures unit the metrics, analytics, and technology unit of VALID International. And those three things will sort of guide what I'm going to show to you guys. On the metric side, again, offhand, you think indicators from the metrics, and that's what we mean by that in essence. And I'd like to present to you sort of our approach to that, our thinking around it. You guys know we've got plenty of indicators out there, and I think nutrition is one of those fields where it gets generated almost often. I mean, we do that a lot. We love doing that. And then you've got health indicators, you've got different nutrition-related indicators that we would want to look into as well every time we want to look at drivers or factors towards malnutrition, etc. So our key focus with metrics is, let's think of the things that we already do very well in terms of indicators, what we call the off-the-shelf ones. Indicators that have stood the test of time. We use them a lot. Over time, we've made them better as well because of practice, because of usage. They're very slim. They're very easy to implement. And the practice of them, the use of them, have made us better in using them, from a data collection perspective. And these are what we call off the shelf, things that we can easily add on, very minimal overheads through data collection, but quite important in how we look at malnutrition, covariates of malnutrition, etc. So these are the food security, one of the things that WFP is quite known for with your VAM unit, WASH indicators, very oftenly associated with known as a nutrition-sensitive type of indicator that influences nutrition-sensitive programming on water and sanitation. Mental health is one thing we've recently worked on in a survey for older people that we've developed with HelpAge. I put it there, just this whole idea that even beyond nutrition, we've dabbled into that. There's quite few well-known standard, sometimes things we've forgotten already, that indicators that work very well. And when I say work very well, I will say this a lot. I say it from a perspective of sample sizes, of study designs. They work very well because we know what they mean. When people answer this, we're pretty sure because of our use of them, this is what people mean and this is what we know when we get the results out of them. And B, because they work very well with sample sizes. You can get them with quite efficient sample sizes. You can nest them in any other type of survey. And because of that, they're very practicable. So these are the things that we want to, kind of old school style. We go back to core things that we know we do very well already as a community. Second, improve on things that we think can be made better. And here by improvement, we don't mean not necessarily technically improving it, and that's not a statement saying that some indicators out there are not good technically. What we're saying here is from a survey design and sample size perspective, we can improve certain indicator sets because we can make them more slick, more efficient in terms of survey design. We can nest them in other surveys and play with the numbers, play with the sample sizes. And if you can do that, again, with the off-the-shelf ones, you can imagine the efficiencies you can gain, how easy they can be put onto other types of surveys, and we can get them very much routinely. And an example I put here is our work on infant and young child feeding. For some of you who's on the Emerging Nutrition Network Field Exchange, we put out this article on infant and child feeding index that we propose as an improvement. From improvement from the point of view that I was talking about in terms of sample size efficiencies and survey design efficiencies. And I will talk about this as a case study in the next slide. And we think it works very well. We can bring down sample sizes. It gives us a snippet of what the full IYCF indicator set gives. And these are the 6 key indicators that we think is the sort of the really most critical ones in the IYCF package, and the ones that often we would ask in programs whether this is this has been measured and this has been addressed by a program. So I'll show that in a case study. And then third one is sort of developing indicators for for programs where none has been built or over time nothing better has been thought of. And as Steve has mentioned, we think coverage specific to CMAM at the start when it was being built, I think there was a conscious effort in building CTC that right on the get-go, its coverage is part and parcel of what it targets to achieve, and because of that, it needed a metric to show that, and a lot of our metric work on coverage is anchoring on that, and based on that work with CMAM. We've expanded that notion of coverage. Some of you would have heard about the rebirth of the whole Tanahashi model of coverage, which is like a standard text in public health, but it's become such a common thing now again because it's quite a clear and clean presentation of bottlenecks and how coverage at different levels can be seen at, and that's one of the core tenets of what we look at from a coverage development indicator development perspective. Very recent work on coverage would be our work with WFP on the piloting MAM treatment coverage indicators, and also our work with GAIN on fortification coverage, which we published on very recently. At the end of the day, across this, off-the-shelf improvements or new indicators, our bottom line is how can we make it very efficient? How can we optimize it? And that's for the most part what we mean by improvements. We're always at this high of wanting to cut off as much as we can the fat, the extraneous things that we get from indicators, and focusing on core things, making it efficient, making it very nimble. So here's an example of what we're talking about, the infant and child feeding index. First of all, as the table shows, it's age-weighted, across this age group that we look at from the standard IYCF, the 6 to 24, less than 22 years age group. The other age group there would be the 0 to 6 months, where we get our exclusive breastfeeding indicator. But what we're showing here is how 3 key components of practice for young child feeding: the continued breastfeeding, frequency of feeding, and diversity of feeding, number of food groups, get a score across that spectrum of age by age. And this is something we've developed based on work done by Arimond and Ruel. This is and which is sort of the basic research that's been used to influence the current IYCF package as well. At some point, there's a divergence between the standard IYCF to how we do the ICFI. One of them you will notice would be for diversity. I mean, standard IYCF would have a diversity cutoff just across all ages, across the 6 to 24 at 4. Here we think there's some variance that we can accept across that age group and say across that, for a younger age group, a target of a 4 food group target every day for a full day might be too much. And again, there is literature that shows that, and I think we think that's a fair way to assess a food group or diversity. Beyond that divergence, though, what we've been seeing as we use this metric is that a typical IYCF indicator across compared to how we use the ICFI, the trends that they will present would be very similar. There will be times where one would show higher than the other or one would show lower than the other, but the trending over time would show similar. So if that was the case, then ICFI with such a much smaller sample sizes, we can do ICFI together with an exclusive breastfeeding indicator for a sample size of about 192 only, compared to an IYCF survey that tends to be nested into a SMART survey of a minimum of about 600 sample size. Your effective sample sizes at the 6 to 24 age group gets to about 240, and even at that, you've got, with the different age grouping categories in the standard package of 15 IYCF indicators, you get a degradation of your sample sizes across those different age groups. No? So this is something that we present. Okay. So this is sort of just grouping together the less than 6 months and then the 6 to 24 age month grouping to classify someone as having good or not good ICFI based on that score, and then we can diagnose it. Based on those key indicators of 6 sets, we can say this is where we need to be focusing our programs on. Is it diversity of food? Is it frequency? Is it exclusive breastfeeding or continued breastfeeding? Who's using this? Cheryl, Minister of Health, uses it for routine monitoring and evaluation of their IYCF programming. Recently, IMC has used this for a lot of their IYCF programming, one of which in Abdi district in Chad, which is a project supported by WFP. I think they will be putting out this report quite soon and sharing with the WFP in country. Analytics, we've got the metrics, we've got the indicators, how we analyze those indicators. This is the second sort of the triumvirate of what we want to do with measures. And I think, again, we go old school as much as we can. We go for tried and tested methods, but are not mainstream, so that we can optimize the sample that we're using and get the most out of it. And the metric for that will basically be the kind of precision that we get. And for that, techniques that we think are quite standard, has a tradition to them, such as the lot quality assurance sampling, and then Bayesian techniques, which is something we use for the squeak surveys, for those that are familiar with it. So that's one aspect of the development. The second aspect of the development is computational. If you can harness computational capacity to our advantage, computing power has gotten much less expensive now. Computers we use on a day-to-day is much quicker than computers we've used at the high end already from before, and use some techniques such as resampling techniques, make full use of small sample sizes already and still get precisions that we want. And then at the third level in terms of development is can we use that data that we've got, and again with available technology right now, and do a bit more understanding of where the problem is. So it's some aspect of geospatial analysis. And again, nothing new in it, but just using techniques that we've not been very, that's not been commonly used in our field, in the nutrition field. One of these developments would be what we've tried out with the pilot work in assessing coverage for TSFP programs, building on work that we've done with CMAM on OTP programs, applying these techniques such as the squeak for those that have heard of it, the sleek, and S3M, and then based on the type of programming, sort of recommend or sort of figure out what the best method among these three would give the best or in most efficient coverage assessment, but at the same time combining these three so that a richness of information can be provided for the program. Across the board, any of these three methods would give an overall picture of coverage, a spatial disaggregation of coverage, and then factors that promote or inhibit or impede coverage. I'll just show some of the figures that we got. This is the Zander example from that pilot. They were one of the areas that was part of that pilot. We've got two metrics for coverage here, something that we've developed across that pilot, case finding effectiveness, how good the program is in finding MAM cases, and a treatment coverage where actual cases that are MAM and also cases that are recovering from a MAM state are being covered in the program. including to that, this is a map of factors that we think can be contributory to being good coverage, and part of it is awareness of mothers of the program, and see that distributed across that space in Zender. And same information in terms of barriers to coverage as a simple bar chart, Pareto chart. A common thing would be, at least for this instance, recognition of the service, or recognition that there is a program that's running to cover MAM cases. Another thing that we've worked on from an analytics point of view is the impact evaluation. This is something we'll be talking about in the next hour with regard to the work we're doing in evaluating your work in Sudan in terms of the food-based prevention of malnutrition. A key tenet that we look at into impact evaluation, and this is something that everyone would, it's the holy grail of evaluation, is to be able to attribute any changes that we see over time when a program has been put in place to the program itself. And this is sort of the trickiest thing for any impact evaluation. And for that, it's got to be something experimental, or as close to experimental as possible. We look for controls. We look for a way to show that control compared to your intervention or to whoever's intervention does make the difference, and that way we can, to a great extent, attribute that effect, attribute that change to the program that's being evaluated. Now, the main problem, especially with programming in the nutrition world, especially in humanitarian contexts and in contexts where it's very volatile, this is very hard. Doing a proper experiment in itself is already difficult, but to do it in contexts where the controls might not be very obvious, or the controls may be very obvious, but it's going to be very hard to justify collecting information on places where you don't intervene in. And these are the things that we want to address, and a lot of the work that we've put in to address that. And there are quite a bit of new techniques, not necessarily new, but things, again, that were reborn from older styles of how we can get around that. And that's something that we're quite keen on, and something that we've applied with the work on evaluating that Sudan project on food-based prevention. Mixed method is a key thing for impact evaluation, and this whole idea of matching up your theory of change of the intervention to what we're seeing with what we're getting from the metrics that we're looking at. And how we see it is that you can get that overall score of a program being able to either be shown that they contribute to that change that's shown, but on the other extent, in terms of theory of change framework, whether we can go through that causal pathway that you've thought of initially from your program and see these are the different aspects in your theory of change that you've actually affected change in, and can elucidate whether or not you've really, or help explain whether or not you've achieved your goal of making a change in your overall or your main impact assessment. So this is something we'll talk about more later with the Sudan events particularly, but it's a good example of what we've got for those elements that we look at from a impact evaluation perspective. You'll hear us talk about the step wedge design, something that we think is one of the most flexible things to do for very complex and very volatile programming settings, because it allows for a lot of flexibility. It's quite complex to implement, and that's very obvious. But I think we think complexity is very important in that setting, because we think it's quite logical to have a complex approach to impact evaluation to a program that's quite complex as well. And we think that kind of simplifying that, breaking it down to a very straightforward classic experiment that you would see in properly done case control studies or what have you, would tend to break right away very easily once the situation changes or once things go awry in that setting. And then again, things that I said, small sample sizes, qualitative inclusion of qualitative elements for a mixed methods approach, and the use of theory of change as an evaluation framework. This is just an example for that Sudan program. If we were to use the nutrition framework as the as a key thing for theory of change, then we think the food-based program is acting on these levels, at that level of food availability, and then from the SBCC side, the adequacy of maternal and child care practices, increasing diversity, hopefully, increasing dietary intake, and decreasing child malnutrition. So we're hoping to be able to elucidate that further with the results we're getting from that impact evaluation. From the technology side, something that, talking to WFP, something that you're very familiar with already with your VAM units, quite cutting edge with the technology they use. But all we're saying is that we've gotten along quite far ahead now with a lot of our survey techniques, and most people use tablets now to collect data. What we're saying is that with everything else that we do with our metrics and analytics, we can put that sort of package that all together and make it even efficient with these technologies. And we are able to sort of, because we develop the metrics, we can translate that very easily with our with usage of the very open source types of tools for tablet data collection or mobile data collection very quickly, very easily, and then leverage the technologies on GPS, capability of those things, and then develop software for analytics. A lot of what we do will be to do bespoke software that will deal with the metrics in the same way that we would deal with them, so that analytics is very efficient and all in one package already. I think one cross-cutting theme, and I'm about to end this now, around this is we've got the metrics, we've got the analytics, we've got the technology. I think, and this is something that I'm sure all of you would agree, at the end of the day, training is quite important. Getting people like you, your teams on the ground, able to use these metrics, use these analytics in their day-to-day work, so that it can be streamlined into your program, it can be part of routine, and they can just get their tools together, these things, get the data collected, and then get the results after that, and you can do your programming. So one of the things that we're trying to work on very much right now in developing is a learning management system where a lot of our metrics and analytics and the use of technology can be put together into a learning package where people like yourselves or your teams on the ground can come onto it online or offline. There's lots of delivery systems around it, depending on the need and depending on the intensity of the metrics and the indicators and the analytics training. That can take a few days or a couple of weeks. It's mentored, someone on the other end supporting you, but at the same time the whole process trains you and prepares you to your actual implementation of the data collection. So that was the idea. And then this is something we've been trying with Syria currently. We call it a learning management system portal and a sort of a remote training system that we will be hopefully using with the teams in besieged areas in Syria to do basic data collection on MUAC assessments, and then collecting this data across time, and then using that data sort of as a surveillance system and see what the trends and patterns in MUAC is, and alongside development of certain cutoffs and et cetera, we'll be able to use that to inform nutrition programming in those areas. So that's one of our dabbles into that. To end this, we'd like to share this thing. This is our map gallery site. It sort of gives you a portfolio of the things we've worked on from a measures perspective, the metrics, analytics, etc. And each of those lighter colored countries will show up in terms of work we've done to assess indicators, how we've mapped them, and how we've presented them across the board. Yeah. I think that's it. That's
maybe this explains that you've got the drop-down menus at the corner, so you can really produce those maps for any of the particular indicators.
Let me get that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. I'll use India as an example. So this is a work we've done on fortification coverage in Rajasthan with GAIN, and you've got layers of map information here as indicators that you can overlay as base layers. being able to compare those indicators. So this is our classic, this is the ICFI indicators that we showed you a while ago. Age-appropriate continued breastfeeding. We're now on dietary diversity. This is meal frequency, exclusive breastfeeding, etc. And then you've got other base overlayers there that you can add to add context. You can zoom in. Yeah, basically, if the Google Map thing, it's a slippy map. Hovering over the map will show you the actual indicator value on the top right. This is sort of how we're trying to present most of our work, so that users can look at their data and then sort of, for how much they would want to use it, kind of leverage what they can find out at a small area level and also at an aggregate level across their programs. Good. Thanks. Sorry for taking too much.
Great. Thanks, Ernest. So I think now I open up for questions. If anyone has any questions for Ernest or Kate or me.
It's just a wide wealth of information, and I know this group isn't shy, so it'll come out. Someone has to go first.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I think this is more of a question regarding your mandate. Now, knowing that we are dealing with all forms of malnutrition, I was wondering whether you will be paying some attention to obesity and overweight. And I know that also measuring even the prevalence in some countries is quite costly and time-consuming. And I was wondering whether there are any plans to develop some tools such as the one you developed for undernutrition to do like quick, small samples, etc.
I'll just talk on mandate. So essentially for Valid, we're evidence-based where there's problems, and we realise the double burden is a real issue, and particularly, there's a lot of discussion of using very energy-dense products, and so that is an issue in nutrition globally, and so that's an area where we would work. In terms of what we would do, we would certainly work that, and I think our techniques would be, Ernest can say more how we could adapt our models for that.
So just as a side on that, it's interesting. So as I mentioned, with HelpAge, we've developed this, what we call the rapid assessment method for older people. So we got that tool ready. You can look it up on HelpAge site, HelpAge RAMOP, Google it, you will get to that site. And one of our HelpAge contact has been showing this around, and this is something he always gets as well. Sort of this whole double burden, but also, especially for older people related to non-communicable diseases. How can we measure obesity as well, overweight? And one I think again, I'll go through it from a metrics perspective. I think even before we think about how we will analyze it, etc., what would be critical is getting a way to measure it properly, because we think BMI is not the right metric. That's one thing. And as you say, if there's something that we can look into as close to a MUAC thing, but not necessarily MUAC. One of the things we're thinking of, again, this is me out of the top of my head on earlier conversations on the RAMOP work, is waist size. I think that's one of the things that we love circumferential measures. That's one thing. But again, I think the evidence is still not clear around that. There is something about waist size in relation to heart disease and stroke, etc. But from what we know of how we looked at metrics related to nutrition per se, it's still not well developed yet, in a sense. So I think the holy grail in terms of obesity, if we were to really make it in the same way that we are right now with undernutrition, is figuring that out. What will be our best way to measure it in a way that's more precise and more practicable than our sort of gold standard now, which is BMI. Once we get that right together, the analytics and everything else will be pretty much similar approaches to what we know, so we can leverage that a lot. So we think the holy grail for obesity, overweight is that metric side of it.
But just linked to that as well, just to carry on, one of the key things we're doing more and more of, and whether we're talking about obesity or stunting, which a lot of our assessments and surveys are aiming to assess or evaluate, what's needed, of course, is a very wide range of sensitive and specific indicators. So our surveys are no longer just looking at coverage of targeted selective feeding programs. They're needing to look at a coverage of a whole range of interventions, whether that be kind of health or nutrition, as well as a whole range of coverage of practices. So how are interventions impacting on infant and young feeding, health seeking, maternal health, that kind of thing, practices. So that's, I think, something important to highlight for a lot of the things we're doing now. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I was very interested in hearing about the ICFI, the Index on Infant Child Feeding. One particular interest, well, as you know, WFP is moving a lot on the prevention side of things and getting more and more involved on the complementary feeding side. And one issue that not only all of us are facing, but also other partners, is at the onset of an emergency, when we go in, and if there's no updated data, then we start doing the rapid assessment. So the question is, has this index been tried in rapid assessment? And if not, do you think that it would be applicable in such rapid assessments?
I think IMC right now is preparing for a rapid assessment in Turkey for fresh refugees from Syria. From what I've heard, because we've been working with them on this. So whether that might be the litmus test for that, whether it will work. If we were to take emergency in a sense that it was two things about emergency, it would be something you would want to do right away once it happens, or two, it's in a situation where it's very hard to implement anything that's like a proper survey, a straightforward survey. And if for the second example, this again, and the IMC work in Abdi district in Chad is quite interesting, and the report is not out yet. But one of the things that they say in what I've read from their recommendations, how it was very hard to do surveys of any kind in Abdi district, from what they're saying, and they were quite pleased at how not trouble-free, but they were able to set it up quite quickly and quite easily. They finished it in about 7 days, from what I've heard, with results soon after. So I'm keen to see more of that, because I saw a preliminary draft. They said they will deliver that to the country, WP Chad, by the end of the month. But that's something I'm keen on, and I agree. Rapidity is important in that, especially in that context, until you get to a point where you feel you can do a more standard survey, probably, or you can latch on to the things that you would have, and VAM can come in and stuff like that. So I'd be keen, and they'll be writing it up on ENN, where we would like to put this out, and that's one of the key things I encourage them to write about, is the practicability of it in the settings that they've done it in. So that Abdi would be one example, and then hopefully Turkey should come in place in Turkey for Syrian refugees, which should be started in 2 weeks' time. Hopefully, very soon after that, we've got some preliminary stuff. Yeah. So yeah, that's where we're at. But
also, just to add, I know we're keen to do much more with this indicator and the rapid assessment method that we have, because the standard approach to measuring nutrition through SMART surveys, we know the standard IYCF indicators they're impossible to measure through those surveys, whereas this indicator with a RAM, which has a much smaller sample size, so we're talking about 200 plus children instead of 900 plus children that you'd have to get to, it's more feasible in a kind of when you're needing quick data to implement a quick one of those. And if you were focusing just on IYCF, so that was just you were only using this score, you could really do that pretty quickly. And so we're beginning to talk to several partners about testing that in different contexts, including possibly remotely, but we'll see. Yeah.
Okay, Gwen, try again, and then we'll take another question in the room.
Hi, can you hear me this time?
Yes, we can.
Oh, excellent. Thank you very much. So this is Gwenola Depla from the regional office in Dakar. I want to say hello to Steve. Happy to hear you again. And I wanted to congratulate you for the work that you've done. And I've not been really following all of this development, and I'm really happy to see them. I'm working on the monitoring and evaluation here for the region. And I think a lot of the tools that you presented and the examples you're presenting really would be to share with the VAM and monitoring and evaluation people. So I will definitely share in my region this presentation and talk to them further. My question was how do you work with WFP and maybe it's a question for WFP as well. How can we use all this? How can we spread it in our region? For evaluation, definitely, maybe also for day-to-day monitoring. I mean, I really like the maps of Zinder and of Rajasthan, and those would be helpful to help us with our programs on a day-to-day basis. So how can we at WFP gain independence? How much can we use those tools? How much does it take to be trained in those tools? To take this on board. Thanks.
I think two things there. I think in terms of services and packages, again, from the metrics analytics side, obviously, if the things that you want to look at are sort of off the shelf already, then all it takes then would be to get that onto a survey design and then get your analytics working for you. So go that. So that can be quite a quick scale up. By scale up, I mean from doing it and from developing it to launching it. And from a training perspective, that would be quite straightforward as well. So we've got quite clear indicators and metrics already. And then all we probably have to put in would be getting you and our teams sort of set up for the analytics side of it, etc. So I think the quickest answer to that is figuring out what you need and what you already have as a capacity, and then from there sort of working backwards and saying what are the things in these packages, in these services of metrics, analytics, and technology you would need, and then putting that together for you, and then adding the layer of the training around it right away. So I think it would be sort of like a shopping thing where we see what you will need from those three services, and then putting in the training component around it to put it in as a package. That's my instinct around those.
Hi, Gwen. Good to talk to you again. Yeah, so I mean, that was one of the reasons we've divided the sort of the valid measures services into these different packages. So it's a sort of pick and mix approach to make it much more flexible for what you actually need as practitioners in the field.
So if I hear you well, do you hear me?
Yes, we got you.
Okay, so it's basically the way we could work together would be me at the regional office getting in touch with you and developing something together, like a training and how to reinforce our capacities here. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Great, thank you.
I think we had a couple questions down at this end. Julia, go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. It was really interesting. I was particularly interested in understanding a bit more about what you've learned so far on the bottlenecks and the barriers and bottlenecks linked to the coverage, because I think that's really a struggle, like in CMAM programming, but also in other parts, in really understanding what's behind our sometimes poor performance in coverage. And so what is coming out of what your of different experiences in countries, and also how has that helped for example, adaptive programming and improving the quality of the programs and improving coverage ultimately? Over.
I think from what I have been learning, again, from... Yeah. I think it's a lot of things in a sense that the context is always changing, and at the same time, I think you are adapting to that. So in a way, again, from my perception, it's sort of you've sort of figured out how to deliver at one point, but then the context has changed, and then you're constantly adapting that. That's one thing. Part of it, I think from what I've seen program-wise and the coverage-wise, that you are working with such limited resources to begin with, that you're having to peg the delivery that you need to do in terms of numbers, in terms of people to reach, and then targeting that is a key thing. And to be able to do that very well requires good information also, where the need is highest, and I think VAM does that quite well. So once you get that figured out, then it's a matter of being able to deliver that service quite quickly, so that you can reach that immediate need right now very quickly. But then again, be ready to evolve and say, once a new metric comes out in terms of what the needs are and whether it changed, that you can again adapt to that again. I think that's I say that in a sense that the way that the metrics have been developed and the way it's being measured is such, in a way, real time, that and for a case such as the moderate acute malnutrition, for example, there's much bigger number of those than SAM cases, for example, that to some extent it doesn't even require just active case finding, which is what we recommend for SAM. To a great extent, you just have to go house by house and really pick them out and find them so you can cover them. But then after a few months, a few days, a few weeks of doing that, by the third or fourth week of a month, that those numbers would have changed already. Again, that's the thing. So you're sort of in a playing ground where you've got your metrics sort of stacked up against you. But one of the things that might work, I think, and I'm not sure there's evidence to show that, is if there's some synergies that can happen between these targeted programs and how they find cases and how they can communicate to each other. I think we've seen that happen in quite a few, and again, from the Sudan experience right now, we think a lot of the cases that is able to get to the TSFP, that's part of what we looked at, was because of good connection and communication with the OTP program. So that's quite one link already. But whether or not some areas that's been targeted by both programs are the same, it's not always the case. I think that's one of the things. But again, that's influenced by a lot of realities. Where you can allocate, how much resources you can allocate. So that's quite a challenging thing to navigate through program-wise.
I just want to add. I mean, obviously, it is very context-specific, and so the models that we've been developing and the tools that we've been developing are very much a lot of them are very much investigative. So they build on what information you know, and then there's a sort of a dialectic between you collect more very focused data to build up those models. And so they're aimed at being very context specific. But in general, I mean, my experience with CMAM is it's one of your question, what are the main determinants? The quality of the community engagement is a real underlying factor. How much people understand, how much you've persuaded decision makers, how much you understand. Because often, we've in the past, we've had programs that have engaged with mothers really closely, but then you find the mother's not the decision maker. That it's the maternal uncle that's the decision maker. So the quality of that engagement and understanding how communities make decisions is certainly across a lot of the programs we've looked at are very key. And there's obviously, access and physical access and ease. And then quality of service is another one that often comes up quite high. If people have a good experience in whatever program they're accessing, they tend to come back. If they have a bad experience, so there are those general themes, but I say that what we found is that there's so many context-specific factors, and hence the techniques we've tried to develop are flexible, that allow you to build on what you know in a sort of iterative fashion.
And just to say, sorry, just to add on quickly, the way that we're looking at those factors now is not so much because we know the limitations around, having to implement surveys and assessments constantly. There's always surveys and assessments and data needs. But what we're doing with the SQUEAK, which is the semi-quantitative evaluation of access and coverage, is really trying to integrate those approaches into a partner's ongoing program monitoring and evaluation system. So it's really about just using existing program monitoring data a bit. We're always trying to aim for this, I know, but a bit more kind of intelligently, I guess, to answer to some of these key questions that mean you have it right there and then and can figure out how to respond to the issues that are coming up and achieve better impact. Yeah.
I think that comes back to my first point, that we've always approached this from a practitioner's perspective, not from an academic perspective.
Right.
It's like what has affected us in our practice, and try to build on that.
We do have 2 questions online and then a couple more requests in the room. Just so everyone knows, we have the room for a bit longer, so we can go 5 or 10 minutes over, but we'll try to wrap it up as soon as possible. So the first question online is from Cyprian. I'll read it since he doesn't have a microphone. Why is the CSAS coverage method, which was good at providing coverage at the quadrant or village level, why was that not considered for use anymore when CTC began? And can we still use it as a method in the field, or is it more advisable to stick with SQUEAK, SLEEK, and S3M only?
Good question. I actually personally prefer CSAS. I think SQUEAK has become quite sexy for very good reasons, because it delivers a lot of nuance and understanding. And I think people want that. Programming people want that. CSAS is sort of that top-line, headline figure type of thing, and geeks, people who do survey like it, because you can feel it. You know how it works. SQUEAK, from a practitioner point of view of those who do it, you really need to have a very good experience about CMAM programming itself to really do it very well. But I think it's, compared to CSAS, you can get more people trained up on SQUEAK in much efficiently. A. 2, B, it can be integrated into routine programming very easily. I would say about 70% of what we use in SQUEAKs are already part of routine programming. And I would even hazard to say that for the most part, we recommend in areas where they can't do surveys that they do what I call SQUEAK 1.0, which is basically classic SQUEAK. It's all investigative, and then you use routine monitoring data, no survey at all. And what that tells you is just basically an idea of whether you're hitting your coverage target or not hitting it. Because again, at the end of the day, for a programming person, I think you wouldn't want to really necessarily know what that actual figure is. It's a funder that would want that. But for you, if you're not hitting a target, then you just need to know how to do that better, and that's what SQUEAK tells you, and then you can measure it again in that way. I think that's what makes SQUEAK appealing. And I think that's what made it kind of evolve in the way it is now. So I guess the quick answer is CSAS is there. People can use it. I know people who still do it. It can be used as a sampling technique for other surveys as well outside of coverage. We use it quite a lot from that perspective. So it's just that for coverage of CMAM programming specifically, SQUEAK has taken on in a way that CSAS hasn't. And I think we think it's because of that. It gives so much value for information compared to a CSAS. Yeah.
We'll take a question from Mona, and then we'll wrap up with 2, if we have time, 2 questions in the room. Mona, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, thank you, first of all, for a very informative presentation, and hi to Ernest again. Yeah, I have one comment and one question. So the comment is basically even using SQUEAK methods, which are very useful in qualitative terms for program management. The quantitative measurement of coverage for MAM still remains a big challenge, because essentially we need to measure all the children in a census type of survey. So that was my comment, and maybe the Valid team would like to say something about it. Secondly, my question is on the ISFI index, which really looks very promising. So the question is, can we use it as a proxy for the minimum acceptable diet indicator, or somehow merge the two and make it part of other surveys like food security surveys? Thank you.
Hi, Mona. Thank you. It's good to hear from you again. So the first question was about the quants, and it's about finding the cases for MAM. And it's quite interesting because, again, compared to SAM, where we can apply what we call an active adaptive case finding approach, where SAM can be seen quite literally. You can describe it, and then people can tell you where you can find those cases. And from the testing we've done in most countries, it's very sensitive. It can the case finding term that you use and the case finding approach that you use for SAM, by just describing it using the terms that pretty bang on and pretty spot on. The thing about MAM is that they can be in that MAM category for MUAC or weight for height, but it won't show physically. There might be some illness, so you can pick it up from there. So the sensitivity from an active adaptive case finding point of view is not very good. And we don't want to do that because, again, it will potentially bias for an underestimate of coverage for the most part. So right now, our best approach is almost a census type, and that's where your first stage sampling comes in quite importantly. If you can maximize where you find your samples and then do a straight on case finding house to house census type in those villages to find your MAM cases by MUAC or weight for height, then that's sort of what we've got right now. I know that the Coverage Monitoring Network has done some testing in refugee setups, whether or not they can apply a different technique to find MAM cases specifically. And I think that I'm not very sure how the alternative that they're proposing, but against a census type of approach, it still shows very low sensitivity. So I think if there were an answer to it, that can still be the holy grail. But I agree with you, Mona, that's one of the rate limiting steps for TSFP based coverage, because you have to find the MAM cases. It's quite challenging to find them. Having said that, again, I think that's one of the things we think is a thing to develop on. Second, for the ICFI, yes, it can be. The questionnaire used for ICFI is the same as what's used for the standard IYCF. So definitely you can still report a minimum acceptable diet, the minimum meal frequency, that's the standard. Your problems will be precision on those estimates because of the sample sizes. So what we tend to do is if someone prefers the standard package and it doesn't have to be rapid, we inflate the sample sizes so that it can accommodate the standard ones. And because they're pretty much the same variables, you can slot it into that diagnostic for the ICFI and still use it. And that's how we were able to compare and say about the trending of how those indicators compare to each other. So again, the short answer is yes. They can be analyzed to give the standard IYCF and the ICFI.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm from the VAM unit. I have two questions. Could you tell me a little bit more about the Syria experience in the besieged areas, and particularly whether that surveillance data, is it reliable, and can it be used as a proxy prevalence? The reason why I'm asking is because a lot of the IPC exercises that we've done most recently, where we haven't been able to declare famine, is because lack of nutrition data. Whilst VAM would develop the MVAM, we're able to collect data from households even when we cannot access them. But of course, with the nutrition, it's more complicated. My second question, another big topic for the food security community is how to adapt tools to urban settings where food access is different, livelihoods are completely different, and basically the face of food security is changing. I was wondering if you have done anything specific for urban settings, and how the food security community, whilst it's adapting its tools, can already now then maybe bring the nutrition aspects into it already from the beginning. Thank you.
Thanks for the questions. So for the first one, for Syria, we're very much in development phase, so we've not really collected data yet. So we're putting all the infrastructure to make sure that we can do as much as we can some level of quality checks. But what we're hedging our bets on is that if we start that data collection and we can sustain it for a long enough period of time, we can look at the data and see what it's telling us and whether or not we can rely on it. That's what we're. So I think because of the dearth of information, any bit of information would be quite interesting. I think so we can see what's possible. And then with the quality checks that we're putting in, we're hoping we can spot whether we can use it as much as.
The approach we're setting up is that it's sample. There's a sampling strategy, so it should stand up to stats and things when we look at it.
Hopefully, yeah. We think so, and it's quite exhaustive. It's basically. For the area that will be selected that they will do, they basically go everywhere on all the children who qualify within the age group. The other thing about it is that the Syria, UNICEF and partners were wanting not just for under 5s but for older people up to 50 years old. So we've got that full. So they'll be covering the whole family actually. So we're quite keen on how it will actually work. We think it can with the feedback we're getting. It's just that because of the volatility, they've been so focused on saving lives, which is really what's important. We haven't gotten it off the ground, but it's pretty much there. And once we get the signal from partners that there's a window where we can start it, and then try to sustain it for a longish enough time, then hopefully we've got information that we can play with. We can see how it looks, how it will behave. We can spot inconsistencies. We can spot qualities of it. For the second one on urban, the urban sample itself tends to be, from our experience, tends to have been included into the bigger samples. So we've never done an urban-specific sample yet. We have a recent work that will do urban-specific, so big cities, but for WASH. But our main input into that work is not the WASH indicators itself, but the sampling. And the way we're developing it in mind is not just for WASH, but potentially for multi-indicators as well. So we're hoping to see what we learn from that. But I totally agree. I mean, programming right now, to a great extent, will have to happen in big populated cities, because that's where, especially for WFP, I think that's quite a key thing. So yeah, that's our thing around that. Yeah.
Okay, we'll have Mutin to ask the final question.
Yeah, thank you. Mine is just, beyond metrics. To what extent do you support governments to improve the quality of care? I mean, I've seen CMAM in different countries, including Sudan and recently in Malawi. Even when we're promoting coverage, if you do achieve that coverage, in most cases, the quality of care is really, something that leave a lot to be desired. So I'm wondering, the extent to which, one, you look at the quality of care, and two, the extent to which you work with governments, host governments, to improve their service delivery. Thank you.
I mean, so as a rule, so we started out much more in emergencies, but we've evolved very much to working with governments and through governments through the existing infrastructure, because we believe that has to be the way that these programs move, unless there's no alternative. So So yes, the answer is we always try and work with government if possible. In terms of quality of care, my experience has been, or our experience has been, that ultimately, if quality of care is bad, coverage tends to drop off because people vote with their feet. And so if they go and they get bad quality of care, ultimately coverage will be affected. So I think why we like coverage is because it's a sort of, it encompasses all aspects of the program. You have to know about the program, you have to be able to access the program, your decision makers have to allow you to access the program, and you have to have a good experience when you access the program and see some effect to carry on going or to tell your friends to go. So that's why ultimately I think coverage is the really important indicator, and within it, quality of care is a determinant of coverage. And maybe your experience is different, that you can have high coverage programs with low quality of care. I've not really seen that so much, but...
Absolutely, if I may. I mean, one, regarding coverage, it's usually an issue of resources. So let's say most countries would do about 50%, 20 to 30%. But even when, for example, the children come for services, we're speaking this morning around Central African Republic, Niger, Malawi, where I was for 4 years, Sudan, where I was for 4 years, you find that, the quality of care when children come, they actually sometimes die in the hospitals and in the centers. And that's I think, where governments would benefit from your skills on how to improve, the barest minimum of CMAM requirements, for example.
Right. I mean, in terms, I think with coverage, we're talking about direct estimates for coverage, not so much coverage in terms of geographical coverage or theoretical coverage. And I suppose, yeah, if they're dying in hospitals, I suppose a lot of our focus on CMAM is on the outpatient, and to actually get the majority of children with SAM without complications into outpatient. So when I was talking about quality of care, it was mainly programs that have very good access tend to reduce the proportion of children with complications. And again, so even though maybe the tertiary care or the inpatient care is lower quality, but again, if you've got very high coverage and people get in there, the proportion who require that care should be less. But certainly, we have technicians. I didn't really say, when I was talking about what we're focusing on now, are still a lot of Valid's core businesses to provide technical support to governments or other stakeholders to improve the quality of programs. So we have a lot of people doing that. So I didn't really focus on it because we're looking at what we're going to do rather than what we have done. But yes, certainly from Valid, we have a lot of, Valid doesn't really, no one joins Valid unless they've got at least 5 years field experience. And so we've got, we're small, but we have very high caliber of people. We've tried to keep it like that rather than lots of lower level people. But we're always very happy to provide technical support to governments to improve their quality.
Thank you to everyone. Thank you so much for this presentation. It's been really informative, and thanks for the great conversation. If there are any other questions, feel free to send them to me, and I'll make sure to connect you to our Valid colleagues. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.